Hey guys, it's me, EODGamer here. I'm super excited to talk about this one, Yunli. She's going to be a super versatile physical destruction character. And if you were to think about her playstyle, it's very similar to the likes of Clara, a counter-based playstyle. But the first question that a lot of you are asking and probably are thinking of is, what is the main difference between both of them? Are they pretty much exactly the same? So Clara's best teams is Yunli's best teams? Not quite. The main difference, and I think the main key differences, is that Yunli has self-sustain in her kit. Clara can get it from a lot of sources like maybe signature light cone and stuff like that, but whenever Yunli uses her skill, she heals a substantial amount of HP, making her team compositions quite broad and not relying on like a healer or anything, especially if she's taking a lot of damage. They both have damage reduction, they both counter, but the main differences between their counter is Clara can counter if her teammates are attacked, whereas Yunli is only countering when she is attacked. And even if she doesn't manage to get attacked, she also can still do some kind of slashing after she parries with her ultimate ability. So there is like some key differences, and it increases Yunli's overall utility, meaning that she can fit in way more team compositions than Clara can, and at the same time, she doesn't really like a few things. So I want to talk about who she doesn't want to play with, because most of you who are watching this video, if you are free to play, you can pretty much slap her in majority of teams and you will make it alright. We'll talk in this video like the best team compositions to make her shine, but I want to first start off with the easiest way to approach this is characters she doesn't work well with. First group of people are the slowest of the enemies. Characters like, well, which literally slow the enemy, or to some extent like Dan Heng, Huynh. These characters that slow the enemy are generally not good for Yunli, because she wants the enemy to attack her as much as she can so that she's able to get even more energy or be able to counter. The more she parries, the more she counters, the more damage she deals overall. So that is something that is important to note. Doesn't mean they are totally trash, it's just they are generally not beneficial to her in a lot of means. Why do I say it's totally unusable? Is because a character like, for example, Ruanmei here, who specializes in breaking enemies, which technically is the exact same thing as slowing the enemies down, making them unable to attack Yunli. Theoretically speaking, that is a net negative for Yunli, but because Ruanmei provides a lot of other buffs, a lot of other team-wide benefits to the entire team, a lot of damage bonuses, this character still can be used, even though that there is a minor setback that you are wanting the enemies to hit you more often and you can't because they are broken. So that is the general scope of things. Other than that, really the only other characters she don't want to play with is guaranteed aggro drawers that take away the aggro from her unless the enemy splash. So for example, like Fire MC, by and large, we only have like I think one main taunter, and I guess you could consider Boot Hill a taunter in some ways, but still not really. Overall, he still works quite well otherwise. But that is mainly the key differences of where I think she can't be played. Anyone else you slap in, you can get by for the most part. Even on those where we mentioned, if you can find a better team for it, she's still okay doable, and that's the beauty about this character. So I always like to talk about this character in all the 8 team compositions, because you can start to see where the characters fall in line. For those of you who want more description on the other team compositions here that is not highlighted, check out the 8 teams of Honkai Star Rail. You can search it up, EODGamer 8 teams Honkai Star Rail, or you can just check it out on our channel. Mainly, Yunli plays into 2 sections: hyper carry and follow-up attacking. Hyper carry is kind of straightforward, we kind of know that. Follow-up attacking is split into 2 categories. One is the traditional guys that you see here, Topaz and Nambi, Aventrine, Robin, Doctor Ratio and stuff. And the second group of follow attackers are actually the counter attackers. For example, like Blade to some extent, Clara, as well as Yunli herself. These characters are fundamentally different from the traditional follow attacking units. Why is it fundamentally different? It's because these traditional ones scale with their own speed. The faster they move, the more damage they do. Yunli, on the other hand, does scale off with the enemy's performance very significantly. The faster the enemy attacks, the more energy she gets, the more she can counter, which makes a very, very huge difference as well. So that is the key part. Now, we will go and dive in a little bit more of this and more specifics too. So the first category, the easiest one and the best way to understand the overall framework, is hyper carry, of course. This is trying to make this character as good as you can. If you really like this character, you like Yunli, I think this is a fun way to start playing the character. So characters that work very well with her are characters that either make her do more damage or help her survive better. Lynx is one of them, draws the aggro, helps her survive, and notice that all 4 of the units here have cleanse, because cleanse is probably the most important thing for a counter character and is the #1 fundamental thing you want to at least have on your team. depending on the meta, sometimes you might not have many enemies that CC you, but the moment your DPS that counters get CC, and because they get attacked so much and so much aggro is drawn on them, if you can't remove that CC, they're absolutely useless, and that plummets the DPS even more than like someone that takes the aggro away, for example. So cleansers like Lynx, Luota, March 7, and Huo Huo, very strong synergy with her. All four of them I feel is very, very possible. Clara and March 7 previously was not the best, especially if your team was getting team-wide damage, but because of Yunli's self-sustain, sometimes you can actually even put March 7 shield on the other characters and still find that a good March 7 with E6 possibly is able to give you enough sustain for the entire team because of the amount of sustain that Yunli provides herself, not requiring too much babysitting in that sense. And taunting works very nicely also to prevent the aggro being drawn away from your characters that are dying and then they are using March 7 shield just to survive from some AoE attacks. So I think all these 4 units are okay. Next up, we have the pivot section. These are the characters that are working well with her and are basically able to like swap into any kind of teams, fit in, flexible characters in nature. And these are units that either battery her directly, like for example Tingyun, who gives battery, Huo Huo that provides battery in terms of energy regeneration to that particular unit. You have buffers like Robin, who taps on that follow-up attacking buffing kind of thematic that Yunli is going for, or Ruanmei even for her amount of damage buffing that she provides, just really, really insane. Unfortunately, if you break the enemy, they can't attack as often, so you need some other source of damage coming in if the enemies are all broken. But as we mentioned previously, we can live with that downside of them being broken a bit longer for the amount of damage buff that she provides. But generally, I would say I prefer a bit more of the more synergetic characters with a character like Yunli. So I'm going to just put like Rami in super small box here so that you guys know that there's a caveat to that. Generally, Yunli doesn't like characters that prevents enemy from moving, freezing them, etc, etc. That's one of the things to think about. So utility characters are characters that basically increase damage in other forms. So all hyper carry, for example, Pella, you are very nicely reducing enemy defenses. You have Gui Knife who increase enemies damage taken. Again, Silver Wolf does defense dropping, a lot of defense breaking the ultimate. Could drop physical weaknesses as well if you play with good amounts of physical in the other slots here too. Generally speaking, I think that Hanya is also possible to play in this slot, and even a character like Yukong, but I think these are a little bit more trickier to play because speed tuning is quite important with characters like Yukong and Hanya. If you are slightly newer to the game, maybe this is the first character that you're pulling for, or you don't care too much about managing your gear and wanting to get into all the speed tuning, I would say stay away from characters that are a bit more complex to play like Yukong. Hanya is okay, you ease into her quite well, but the question is, do you have like these other characters on top which are likely going to outperform? And that's what I want to talk about in the hyper carry section. So next up, we have another fun one. This breaks away from that hyper carry team, but still in the line of the counter mechanic. And this time, I want to tell you about a bruiser team. I know you see Blade here is very specific, but it basically any other sub DPS that has a counter mechanic that might be introduced in future could be very good. And this is basically what this team is great for is if your enemies move very fast, they're hitting you very hard, then they are somehow one-shotting your teams. This is a very good counter to that because the more they attack, the more damage you do on them. And these units are generally quite chunky because they have either very high HP, some sort of self-sustain, damage reduction in their overall kit, and performs the better the enemy performs. So I'll just put up here any other counter, any other future counter units. So any sub DPS or even main TPS can be played together with Yunli, and I think this is a team that could be quite strong if there wasn't like a DPS limit or turn counter on all of the different stages eventually. Maybe PvP one day in Honkai Star, who knows. But two units that I think could be considered would be chunkier characters, because if you're taking a lot of damage team-wide, you want a chunkier unit, and Robin is probably the chunkiest unit. Not talking about physically, but in terms of her overall stats. She has generally high HP, she has general crowd control resistance when she is in her out form, does very, very well. Very expensive so far, but you get the gist of it in line. The other 4-star characters here and here, like Pella and stuff, are a bit squishy. I was thinking of like putting them in, whether I wanted to put them in, but they are a bit squishier compared to the 5-star supports who also can do damage. So characters like Ruanmei are also okay. in a sense because she is able to help increase the damage dealt. But again, bruiser teams don't really like Runmei too much. And I was putting her here in smaller fonts because what I want to talk about is in a team where you have your majority of the damage coming from enemies hitting you, this is when I actually would take Runmei aside, and that's like the biggest difference and probably one of Runmei's only weaknesses when you don't want the enemy to not be attacking, and that is counter teams. So last but not least, as mentioned, the utility slot is pretty much similar. I like Luo Cha a lot, especially if you have characters that get attacked a lot. They have a chance of dropping below 50%, and he immediately just like sustains them without skill points at all, removes their debuff, so perfectly fantastic for that. Whereas the other characters are a bit more active in their involvement or use some sort of skill points to cleanse debuff. And you can allocate like the skill points elsewhere. So that is for bruiser teams. It's more for the future, but a fun one, just to take a short break of all these like meta team. Let's take a easy fun break here that I'm going to definitely try out in sometime in the future, and that is a full counter team as well. This is a meme. I don't know whether can I say it's meme. I'm not too sure whether I'm putting it, but I'll just put it as that because technically you're not at your maximum DPS because you don't have a support buffing you in terms of harmony. You don't have nihilities debuffing, but it's a fun one. Definitely going to be quite fun. The top row here, everyone counters when you get hit, so you can have Clara outing, and then you have like Blade here with a taunting from for example like Yunli. So you put Blade right beside here, and you put a shield on Yunli, enemy splashes a bit on Yunli and Blade, then you can possibly get a whole team of counters. It will be quite funny to watch, but I think it's going to be definitely an interesting lineup, especially if they have some buffs for following up on the enemy's turn or something like that. Just will be very, very interesting, comedic to see, I think. And some other supports that can be used, of course, is Huo Huo, Luo Cha, Links. It's pretty much the same guys, but the rule of thumb is I need cleanse. If I don't have cleanse, I don't feel comfortable, and the abundance characters generally outperform because you don't really want the preservation characters to pull the aggro away. The only exception is March 7, as you can see here, because March 7 allocates aggro draw to other characters. That is the fundamental difference between March and the other preservation units. Next up, enough of all the hiding stuff. Let's just talk about it straight. Sustain tank Yunli. This is, in my opinion, a theory that I have, a test that I want to put in future. The question is, can she solo sustain? If she can self-sustain herself on enemies that are single target in nature, because once we have splash, you definitely need some sort of like sustain for the rest of your roster, like March 7, and maybe quote-unquote lesser healers like Lynx or Natasha, who are deemed as unable to like sustain the entire team on their own at higher level content. A tank that is able to sustain the entire team could draw a lot of aggro to herself, prevent the rest of your team from doing damage, meaning you can have like a triple harmony team. For some whales that are wanting to do it, you can have like Runmei, you can have Robin, and even like, who knows, Sparkle or some other DPS, some other unit, like even maybe Yukong in the team as well, because Yukong does decent amount of damage, does do a lot of buffing the entire team, could be an extremely high DPS team. The question is it the right typing? I don't want to dwell too much on this. This is just a thought that is in my mind, and I think it could be best because it opens a category for her that no other character currently can play, not even Clara, because Clara does need a little bit more sustain or gear to give her that sustain in. Yunli has it in her kit, so it's very, very fantastic. Last but not least, I always like to touch a little bit on free-to-play teams. I know not everyone is a pay-to-win whale-like player, so a little bit of free-to-play friendly teams. The characters here they're all free-to-play. You can get them as progressing the story. I think that the choices for free-to-play is very, very fantastic. Probably one of the best characters to start off the game with now in like version since Panacony and beyond, because this unit is super friendly on resources. You have many characters, Lynx, March 7, who are likely going to be very strong for her, very good supports for her already because of Lynx aggro draw to the DPS, sustain that you get for your DPS, March 7 that puts up the aggro draw for your DPS even more, even has some sort of like counter mechanic also to play into those trends, so doing a little bit of damage on the side. Unfortunately, she's ice and freeze, so that is not really the most ideal, but still okay because she doesn't really freeze everyone too often too. And Serval is a decent unit if you are looking for a bit more AoE damage focus, especially if you want to go into the pure fiction game mode, because one of Yunli's downsides is she doesn't fare too well in the pure fiction game mode. Enemies attack relatively slowly compared to the amount of time that is given in the pure fiction game mode, which is like 4 turns. So Serval helps you hedge a little bit of those risks in the early game. Later on you can form better teams, of course, but for new players in the game, I think you can consider Serval because Yunli does quite good amounts of single target damage on her own already. and you're likely going to be building her. Serval is like very, very fast bursty, doesn't require too much other than gear, some gear. Utility-wise, I think for new players, it's easier to go with Esther for support. She's much more simpler to understand, just buffs the whole team in terms of damage, attack, as well as speed, which although Yunli doesn't care too much for, it is team-wide buff, easy to understand. She does provide quite a lot of attack buffs and fire break, which you probably will want in the early to mid game. Other than that, of course, you can consider Yukong, but Yukong, note that is a slightly more complex character to play, especially if you're free to play. You have her at low copies, unless you are super lucky and pull a lot of her and you get her all the way E6. Yukong is, can be a DPS, can add a lot of damage to a team. A lot of speedrunners use Yukong as one of the first ever 0 clears in the game, but she hasn't seen herself coming back for 15 patches, 15 banners rather. So a lot of people forgot about this character, but this is still a super strong character as well if you have her at higher Eidolons, and she's a bit more complex to play because she does require some turn manipulation. But generally, if you're up for the challenge, I think she's very fantastic too. And those are my thoughts for free-to-play teams for Yunli. If you're interested to know our other thoughts on build guides on her, how does she compare with the other characters coming up, should you pull her, check out the other videos on our channel as well, especially these two right here in the end screen. And thank you again so much for your attention. See you next video.